What you see on the background of this video are Google search results of blind leading the blind. I've typed this in just to check what type of illustrations I would receive. Now this is a painting. I believe here it's bigger. And you can clearly see a bunch of blind folks being led into a pit by others who were also blind. Let's look at others. Okay, this is an obvious one. They're going to crash and they're going to be injured, but they're all following this guy here, who himself doesn't see what's going on. He doesn't know what's going on, but yet he's a leader. Again, this one trusts the leader, and the leader goes to the pit. I believe this is another one. I'm showing these visuals to reveal onto you how ridiculous it would be if in reality a literal blind individual would lead a crowd. If a blind individual receives a leadership position, people would say, this is not possible, this individual can't even see. Okay, let's say you are hiking, okay, and you have a guide, but the guide is blind. How is he going to lead you on the trail? How is he going to lead you towards the top of the mountain or the volcano? He can't. So, what did Christ mean when he said that the blind can't lead the blind? Obviously, he's not talking about literal blindness, because that's obvious. I mean, come on, you wouldn't even allow a blind individual to drive a car, nor to ride a bicycle, because you know that it will escalate. Accidents will happen. Yet Christ used that statement that the blind can't lead the blind. Why? Because they will fall into a pit. Christ wouldn't say that if it didn't happen. So how does it happen that the blind lead the blind? It comes down to this. People, I'm saying common folks, which unfortunately this also counts for some believers, they have expectations that society conditioned them into, but they can't see that those expectations are artificial. So everything they do is in line with those expectations. And it comes down to this. They have a black and white thinking. They have expectations. If those expectations are honored, they feel praised. If those expectations are either ignored or neglected, or people don't give in to them, they become upset. They are offended. So they only see human beings in two categories. Enemies, those are people who don't conform to their expectations, and potential friends, those that align themselves with their expectations. I said potential friends because they only consider people to be their friend if they can control them. That's the mindset of worldly people. It's a black and white thinking. And this black and white thinking it's not real. Because reality isn't black and white. But that's how unbelievers perceive things, through a black and white mentality. So what happens is that eventually they will look for someone that will promote and advance their expectations. But the one that will be leading them will also be blind. Because the blind will only choose another blind individual to lead them. The blind, in this case, people with a black and white thinking, will only allow someone with a similar black and white thinking to lead them. Someone that sees in full color, so someone that looks at the bigger picture, they will not adhere to such an individual. That's why cults work. Because people, what I'm mean is worldly people, they love this exclusive attitude. This exclusive attitude is what keeps society going. People want to be validated. And for them to be validated implies someone else does not receive validation. Because if everyone receives validation, there's nothing special about validation. And worldly people want to be significant. And there's nothing wrong with wanting to be significant because it's a natural, God-given urge that human beings have. But worldly people want to meet this need for significance outside of Christ. And the way it's done is by them clinging together to some expectations and excluding everyone else that don't align with those expectations. So it's an us versus them mentality. This exclusive way of thinking is what motivates worldly people. That's why in the world there is this strong demand for conformity. Why do you think that on many schools, I'm talking about secondary schools, they enforce a uniform? Because when everyone dresses the same, talks the same, and reacts in the same manner, people feel included. But that also implies that everyone that does not wear the uniform is an outsider. And because they are excluded, you don't have to pay attention to them. You don't have to be responsible towards how you affect them. So it's really a form of avoidance. Now, people with a black and white thinking, eventually they'll find themselves in a pit. Why? Because reality itself is not, I'm saying like this. If you have a terrain and you have a map, if the map matches the terrain, the map is good for use. The map just shows what's out there. But you still need to be alert when you're out there. For example, if you are traveling through the jungles of Panama, you may have a map showing the roads through the jungle. And the map can be correct. Nevertheless, you need to watch out for wildlife while you are walking out there. That's obvious, right? But people with a black and white thinking, they have a map that does not reflect the terrain, which is life, at all. Instead of facing this, they hold on to the map. And they all come together to agree on the map. And now they want to force that map on the terrain. Even though what they want is not compatible with the terrain. They want persistent and never-ending patterns and cycles that work out on their behalf. And they want this without having to deal with the pain, frustration, and backlash that comes along with these patterns and cycles. It's the same as someone jumping in a pool but they don't want to become wet. It's the same as stabbing someone and not expect them to bleed. It's not going to happen, but that's what common people do. They have a map which represents the mind constructs they've been conditioned into, and they want those mind constructs to be preserved at all costs, but they don't want to deal with the conflicts and the destruction that comes along with those mind constructs. They don't even want to acknowledge that those mind constructs are just that, mind constructs. So eventually, they will have people leading them, but those that lead them will lead them into destruction. Because that's the only place they can go with that mindset, destruction. And that brings me to another thing. If this world is run by pagans who worship Apollo, the beast, and if the rich of the world are all involved in devil worship, and if they are the leading figures in the economy, in politics, in the academic world, in entertainment, if they are the leaders of society, and they worship demons, then that implies that the formalities that commoners follow are also forms of devil worship. What is politeness and what is rudeness? That's also a black and white thinking. Polite versus rude. What is politeness? Politeness is when you give in to the expectation of someone else just to keep the peace. Rudeness is when someone or when a group of people have expectations and you decide you're not giving in to those expectations. Those are the definitions of politeness and rudeness. So, what someone considers rude can be considered just polite with someone else. But it's also from black and white thinking. You have an expectation. If it's honored, you're happy. You feel euphoria. If it's not honored, you feel hurt. So the other individual hurt your feelings because they didn't give in to what you want. And so now you want the right to act out against them. So you label them as rude, you condemn them, you begin to avoid them, you begin to take action against them because your expectations have been violated. So you feel violated. But one question. Are those expectations that the other didn't give into, are they correct? Are they right? Are they honorable? Are they in line with Christ? And you may think about it and realize, I never thought about that. Okay, but then why are you holding on to those expectations? And why do you claim the right to take actions against another human being for whom Christ died? Just because your expectations that you don't want to examine are not honored. So your expectations are more important than God's will. They are more important than the well-being of the community. They are more important than the human lives. So human beings only matter to you if they match your expectations that you don't want to check? What? But that's how a lot of folks think. Their blindness is a mental blindness that's caused by their unwillingness to examine themselves. So it's not something that is enforced on them from the outside. It's something that's self-inflicted because they're not willing to look in the mirror. Instead, they want an external structure that will enable them in this relief seeking. And you also have many people out there that claim to follow Christ and they are in complete darkness. They may use Bible verses, they may say the right things, and that may trick you into thinking that they're really serious into following God. When you look at the fruit they produce, it's all duality, black and white thinking. And there are things they say that even unbelievers without any spiritual knowledge can see that that's wrong. Let me give an example. There are many churches that preach obedience to parents. By the way, in scripture, only children are told to obey parents in the Lord. So even children shouldn't obey parents unconditionally. But the Bible doesn't support that. Because you also have wicked parents. You also have parents out of their mind who want to use their children. There are parents selling out their children to pedophile rings and all that. You have wicked, out of control parents out there. And by the way, human beings are meant to function in communities. So it's not just the parents that ought to look after the children, the whole community does. That's why you are a human community. So when the parents are out of line, there must be a safe environment for the child to reveal that to others so that people can enter in. This whole idea that parents have a sovereign right upon their offspring, it's not biblical. It's never and nowhere supported in scripture. But you have those churches where they promote obedience to parents without a Christ-centered context, so that's already deception, and they also promote honor to parents. Also without a Christ-centered context, so that's a deception also. But you never hear them speak about parents being honorable towards their offspring. And then you have those adherents to those churches who are posting things on Facebook. They're posting memes like, "I am your parent, not your friend." But so they are expressing a common way of thinking, that parents ought to be distant and controlling towards their children in a hierarchical way. Now, it is true. Scientifically, it is true that when someone is just a small child, they need an hierarchical figure around. That's true. But once someone is not a child anymore, someone enters their teenage years, the relationship has to change. Yet, you have this thinking in society that parents ought to have this hierarchical, controlling, distant attitude towards their offspring. And then you have those churches where this traditional way of thinking is expressed and people adhere to it. So when they have their children, they are inflicting this way of thinking on their children by being a distant, controlling figure towards their children. And when the children, I'm saying the teenagers then, revolt against this because this is not natural, they then come with Bible verses to justify them lashing out against the children, gaslighting the children into giving them honor. And because the local church and the local pastor enables them, they feel vindicated. But let someone come by, let's say you have an atheist that comes by, and this atheist looks at the situation and he tells the parents, "Are you out of your mind? If someone's a little child, of course you need an hierarchical figure because they can't think. But those are teenagers. They're in their development. You should relate to them in an appropriate way. What you're doing is you want to control them to relieve yourself. Those children are not your drugs. They're not your cocaine that you sniff to feel good about yourself. They're human beings with intrinsic value. You claim to follow God, right? If you claim God is real and He exists, why are you treating His creation, in this case your children, as trash? Don't you realize that your children aren't really yours, they're God's to begin with? But let's say an atheist will say that those indoctrinated church folks, would begin to cast out that atheist saying you don't even believe in God, you're going to hell, blah blah blah, because those indoctrinated church folks are so into their indoctrination. They can't even see their own iniquity. And that's why Christ said, "Be alert so no man would deceive you." Christ even said that men would come in His name and they would do mighty miracles. So if there would be deceivers, charlatans doing miracles, then what about common traditional ways of thinking that aren't even miraculous? I use the example of raising children in this video, but there are many more ways of thinking that don't line up with Christ and that don't even line up with reality, don't line up with nature. Yet people don't want to see it. Their blindness is caused by themselves. When you're dealing with such blind people, realize you're dealing with someone in denial. And eventually such people will become delusional. And once they become delusional, they become dangerous. So when you see a crowd of people who are blind following someone that validates their blindness, then realize you have a situation where the blind are leading the blind. Now once the end result, it will fall into a pit. It will head towards destruction. So above all, agree with Christ and be at peace.